Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Oh, more people coming. Connecting to audio. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Prepared for the exam? If one of you guys can unmute and let me know if you can hear me and see my screen, that would be much appreciated. Also, you are being recorded. I will be posting this up to YouTube later so that everyone can watch. So just wanted to let you know that.
Hi, Esmond. I can hear you okay.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I can hear you and see you okay.
Perfect. Yeah. Feel free to turn on your cameras as well. It's nice to be able to see your happy faces before you write the exam. So yeah, so this is just going to be a really casual Q&A. It's not so formal like Dr. Ross's Q&A. I'm not as good as Dr. Ross. He's incredible. He's so knowledgeable and can keep on talking about everything. But yeah, I've got a couple questions down here that I haven't answered yet. And if you guys want, if you had certain questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and turn on your video, and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, so I believe this is yours, Michelle, right? Yeah. Okay, so your first question is, will there be questions in the new 2021 BG monitoring update? So the answer is no. Your test was completed on February 1st, 2021. So like, in the old days when it was printed, it would have been printed by then, and nothing afterwards would be included in the exam. So you don't need to worry about those. You don't need to do any last minute cramming for that. I know that just came out like just a couple of weeks ago. Okay, and then your second question is, I still have questions on the lows and SU. Okay, so let's talk about that more. Let's go to that. So I can understand where you're coming from now that you showed me that definition. But let's just go to that. Okay. Actually, Michelle, if you could just unmute yourself and turn on your video if you're comfortable, then we can just chat about that. Okay. So here, let me read out the question just so that everyone knows first. So this was the definition given in the guidelines, and Michelle was just wondering if, this kind of implies that, oh, you only treat if they're on an insulin or on a secretagogue. And is just wondering if the same protocol applies to people who are under 4, but they're not on secretagogue or insulin. They're on, one of the many other types of diabetes medications. And I know looking at this, it seems to imply that it's just for insulin secretagogues. But if you look at the treatment section, it talks about, people taking alpha glucosidase inhibitors, acarbose, which is not an SU or insulin, and it talks about giving glucagon. So I think it's safe to say that this implies that that's the treatment for whatever hypoglycemia that you have. And that's what I've always told my patients too. If they have a lows, even if they're not on insulin or SU, to take the same protocol of the 15 grams of carbohydrate and retest in 15 minutes, and keep repeating if it's below 4, have a protein and snack if it's above 4, and then continue on like that. Yeah, does that answer your question, Michelle?
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm having trouble finding all the places to open up my screen. And so
okay, no, I can hear you.
Sorry, I don't mean to be, not showing myself.
No worries.
But yeah, I think it was just a little bit confusing because when I read through it, it did sound to me like it was geared towards people on either an SU or.
It does imply that a little bit.
Yeah, and actually a case actually came up where somebody had, I forget what combination they were on. One of them was metformin, but the other one I can't remember now because it was a while back. And I actually went to the guidelines and read through it to kind of get the gist of how far into it they went, whether, they would be better off just to have maybe a snack, rather than go with a full 15 grams of carb. Because, if they're not taking something where insulin is part of its MOA, then I was just concerned that they wouldn't have, you're pumping all this carb into them, and they wouldn't necessarily be able to, get rid of it as easily as somebody who was on an SU or insulin.
Yeah, so it is confusing because it's here it makes you think that it's only for insulin SU, but you can like if you think of it from a pathophysiology level, it's low blood sugar is causing your brain runs on sugar, your blood sugar is low, therefore like kind of regardless of what brings it low, like I could be exercising and it would be causing a low, and then I would treat that by having sugar.
Right. Okay. No, that's fair enough. Thank you for looking into that for me.
Oh, no problem. No, I can see where you're getting it from. I didn't understand it first because it wasn't here, but you're right. It does kind of imply that, oh, this is only for insulin SU.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the only different things are is that if you're on a carbose, then you need to use pure glucose. That's a question that's shown up on the exam sometimes because acarbose blocks the breakdown of certain carbohydrates. So if they're on that medication, then it doesn't work. The other issue is that if you're on alcohol, then glucagon doesn't really work for you. Glucagon helps your liver, stimulates your liver to break down glycogen into glucose. But when you're under the effects of alcohol, your liver is basically dealing with the alcohol and can't be bothered with the breaking down the glycogen. So those are two things to know for the exam. Yeah. Okay. I guess I should write that down. I'll write that down later. Is Carlene here? Let me check.
Hi, Esmond. It's Carlene here.
Oh, hi there, Carlene. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Good.
I'm on my phone, so I'm trying to not use my camera only because it's too many little screens that are coming up. I'm trying to see all the questions. I apologize. So.
Oh, no worries at all. So
yeah, hi everybody. Nice to hear everybody.
Yeah. So this is a great question. The answer is that the CDE exam is a national exam, and there's no nationally agreed upon protocol for ketones. So it won't be a question.
Thank you for saying that, because I've been trying to, I'm like, there's gotta be one. I was thinking there's gotta be one, but there isn't, right?
There isn't. And so there's no, like, your test is the test everyone's writing from BC to, PEI and stuff like that. It's not province specific or anything like that. So because no one in Canada agrees on an agreed amount, then there's it won't show up on the exam.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense then. Yeah, no, because it's interesting because it came up with, I had a patient who was who was sick at home on Wednesday. And so we're going through the protocol, and then I was looking at, I'm like, oh, I've got, like, one nurse gave me a different handout, another gave me a different handout. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting, because then the patient found also something online. And so I was kind of seeing, okay, they're close, but they're not the same, right? So I was actually going to the guidelines to try to find it, and I'm just like, I can't find it. So yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you for confirming that I'm just not missing a line somewhere. So
yeah, no problem. You're not missing anything. It's not agreed upon, so it won't show up on the exam. But in real life, just follow whatever your local guidelines are. All of them are kind of similar. They're all like tests within X amount of 1 or 2 X amount of hours. If ketones X amount, go to so. But follow your local guidelines.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, Sue, are you here? Let's see.
Yes.
Oh, hi there, Sue.
I'm here.
How are you doing today?
I'm here. Good.
Oh, okay. How are you feeling for the exam?
Not very great, actually. I'm
Oh,
trying
no.
to cram like crazy tonight and tomorrow. So,
Okay. So I'm off tomorrow. So if you do have questions, just put in an exam form and I'll probably answer pretty quickly.
okay.
I keep forgetting that people write on like it used to be everyone always had to write on Saturday when it
Yeah.
was, I guess, in person. So I keep forgetting to take, I should have taken today off to help the Friday people. But anyway, so your question has been asked a lot, and it's because there's some conflicting advice in the guidelines, and it's right here. Yeah. So it's annoying because it says like, right here, type 1 diabetes has not demonstrated a beneficial effect. But then right underneath it, it says an inverse association between exercise and A1C. So that means that, okay, it is related. And it's like, I looked at both studies and I think it's conflict and I can't get a straight answer basically. I think the problem is that a lot, it used to be a lot of people with type 1 were always thin. But in my practice lately, I've actually had a lot of overweight type 1 people with type 1 diabetes. And if you just have type 1 and you're thin, then it's all a problem of insulin secretion. There's not really a problem with insulin resistance. But if you're overweight, then there is a problem with insulin resistance, and physical activity does help overcome insulin resistance. So I think the issue now is that, you're starting to have more overweight people with type 1 diabetes. And for those people, exercise does help with their diabetes control. So I think that's why they're finding conflicting advice.
Yeah, because even if recommendations, like the first recommendation in that chapter says that it helps to improve glycemic control in adults with type 2 and kids. And then it goes on to say that it helps to reduce cardiovascular disease and overall mortality in adults with type 1. But I don't see anywhere in there that it says it helps with improved glycemic control for type 1.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right, because it doesn't say it outright. It says that there's an inverse relationship between physical activity and A1C, which kind of implies
Okay.
that the more you exercise, the more your A1C goes down. So it's a really confusing part of the guidelines because they put like kind of two contradictory statements right beside each
In the
other.
same paragraph, yeah.
Yeah. So you're not the only one. Like every year, lots of people are like, why is this here? It's so confusing.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I had
you.
the same question. Thank you for asking it.
Wonderful. We can all learn together. Okay. Sue, oops, wrong question. Essentials. Okay, so this is the same. See here, it's the same thing here because oh, I don't actually have it, but this one, if you look at it, question 29, it asks about improved glycemic control for type 1 diabetes. See, it's odd here because in the essentials, it says that according to their answer, it says that glycemic control does improve diabetes because they chose E, all of the above. And one of the statements was glycemic control improves exercise improves glycemic control in type 1 diabetes. So it's really confusing. And for the exam, it's hard to say what I would do for the exam because it's so confusing. I would probably leave, if you do find a question like that, I'd try to leave that one to the end and try to eliminate all the other answers and see if you can eliminate it and then go from there.
Okay.
Yeah, but great question, Sue.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see what else here. This is from Conrad. Is Conrad here? No, Conrad's not here yet. I'll just wait for Conrad to come online before answering this one. And then I've got some questions on, for those who are on insulin and reducing And any comments about the new? Yes. So sure. Here's Conrad. Here, so here, let's answer these questions. Yeah, so definitely the Ramadan paper will be on the exam. It came out before February 1st, 2021. And the carbohydrate position paper, yes, that came out before February 1st, 2021. And so that will be on the exam. In terms of comments, I've got a whole chapter on it on my chapter study guide. So you can just review that. It's just at the bottom here. And it's got recommendations for that. Generally, here, let me go through it quickly. Let's make that bigger so everyone can see. In terms of, so you should know this, table 1, that showed up, I believe that showed up on my exam in May, so you should know that. Insulin securitagogues and stuff like that, basically you just reduce the dose. It talks about it right here in the recommendations. Yeah, you just reduce, if they're on securitagogues, you reduce it. If they're on basal insulin, you reduce it. If they're on rapid acting insulin, obviously you wouldn't do that while fasting. And yeah, did you have a more specific question on that or something like that?
I was thinking about, that was a question I was asking. And thank you for doing these Q&As.
No problem.
So I was reading through this earlier today, and I noticed that, it talks about reducing by 20%, then it says reduce by 30 to 40%. And those percentages of insulin are like just all over the place. And I'm just trying to figure out how I can kind of keep it in my head while I'm trying to keep the other stuff in my head. And I'm just, so that was, and I did look at the webinar that they did on this paper, right? So that helped a little bit in terms of how to shift your medications so that you're avoiding hypoglycemia during the daytime and kind of basically shifting everything to the evening from sundown to sunup. Right? Yeah,
I know. It's just basically trying to, like much of the exam, it's basically trying to memorize a bunch of numbers. Yeah. So, but it was published before February 1st, 2021. So it will be on your exam. Yeah.
Okay.
And then with the low carb diet, did you have a specific question from that part?
Yeah, I was wondering specifically because there's some discussion on that paper between low carb and type 1 and then low carb and type 2, right? So there's more research now around type 2 and low carb is good and glycemic control and all of that. But the issues around type 1 and low carb are not as strong. So they're basically not recommending it like they are for type 2. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, you can generalize it like that. Yeah. And the reason for that is, so with low carb diets and keto diets, you're using less carbohydrate for your source of energy and burning more fat into ketones. The problem is that ketones are acidic and they oppose insulin actually. If you look at those protocols that those like ketone protocols that vary from province to province, like if you have a small amount of ketones, you add plus 10 to 20%. If you're more, then you add plus 40%. If you're really high, then you go to the hospital. Ketones kind of cancel out insulin. And so, so that's a little bit more dangerous for people with type 1 diabetes. For type 2 diabetes, usually they're overweight. Sometimes they have hyperinsulinemia, which means that their pancreas is working and producing like tons of insulin. That's kind of like the first stage. And that's what causes the burnout. So maybe they're in like pre-diabetes, their pancreas is working lots to keep their sugar under control, but eventually your pancreas wears out and it starts making less and less insulin. But there's usually still some insulin production with type 2. Like the beta cells aren't completely destroyed. There may be they're maybe only working like 10, 20%. And so that 10, 20% is usually enough to keep them from going into diabetic ketoacidosis. Whereas with people with type 1 diabetes, they have no insulin reserve. Their pancreas is completely destroyed by their immune system. And so if they did shift into DKA, there's zero insulin reserve to cancel out some of those ketones. And so it's a lot more dangerous for them. That's the same problem with the SGLT2 inhibitors. Now, there's lots of the exact reason why SGLT2 inhibitors cause DKA in type 1 is still, they're still arguing over the exact mechanism. But, you can, like, if they miss insulin, it's dangerous, because then they've got all the sugar and they have no insulin to get rid of it, and ketones start building up. There's some studies that show that SGLT2s increase glucagon, and glucagon can increase your sugars and insulin resistance. It's a counter-regulatory hormone, and they think that maybe that's why you get this euglycemic DKA. There's like a bunch of resistance. Your sugar is being peed off, but it's still a whole bunch of insulin resistance, and you have this insulin deficit causing DKA. Now, that won't be on the test, because all the endocrinologists are still arguing over what exactly is the mechanism, but it's kind of the same thing as low carb diets. It's more dangerous in people with type 1 because they have no insulin, and they can turn into DKA more easily.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Okay, let's see who's here. Okay, I think Conrad's here now. Perfect. So let's go to his question. So this is one of your sample questions. Claire is 25 police officer, type 1 diabetes. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, so here, let's work on this then. So her total daily basal is 20. And then her total daily bolus is 20 as well. So the first one, take 20 units. So that's wrong, because you didn't do the 10 units. You didn't do the 10 to 20% reduction from going from twice daily to once daily. So this part here is the wrong part. This part is reasonable. It adds up to 21, which is pretty close, but this part here is already wrong. Switch to 10 units of basal analog at breakfast and bedtime. Okay, so then you didn't do, okay, so you went from intermediate to, okay, that's okay. And then 10 units short acting before breakfast and supper. If you can get away for once daily dosing, I don't know why you wouldn't do that.
So, yeah, so that's the one I chose because
okay.
I saw that the A1C was 9.1, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously I know that sometimes you decrease the dosage if the book, if you're going from like a BID intermediate insulin to like a single dosage, like a basal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with it not going that way, I figured, maybe you just get better glycemic control.
Yeah, no, but that's a good point. Like in real life, you could probably get away with not doing that, because their A1C is 9 anyway, so it's high. Yeah. So you want to do something about it.
Yeah.
So in real life, you could probably get away with that, especially if they're not having any lows. But on the exam, they're more sticklers for like protocol, and so they would want you to do the 20% reduction.
Yeah, I can kind of, like, I figured out, like, I could understand the answer after the fact, but it just seemed really, like, this does not reflect.
Like in real life, in real life, you could do number 1.
Yeah.
And then, so this thing about fluctuating blood glucose, usually you can interpret it as she needs to switch from short-acting insulin to rapid-acting insulin. Like, that's how I would interpret it on a test. Maybe not in real life, but on a test, that's how I would interpret it. So because this person is staying on short-acting insulin, I would suspect that question is wrong. Also, like going from 10 intermediate to 10. Oh, yes. Is that Regan? Hi, Regan. So, oh yeah. So, and also most basal analogs don't require you to take it BID. Like Levemir, yeah, but Lantus at this low of a dose, usually you just put it once daily. So this would make it like, this would be an okay answer, but it would be like the number one answer, kind of the best answer. So this one, it does reduce the 10 to 20%, so that's correct. And then 6 times 3 is 18, which is close to this, so that's a good answer. This one, he increased the insulin, so that's definitely wrong. And then 6 times 18 is close, but so yeah, this is a close answer. This is maybe a real life answer, but for the exam, this would be the best answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, perfect. And no, that's the questions I have. So yeah, I just want to, oh, I got some comments here. Can you repeat why the first choice was wrong? Oh, so the first one is because he didn't reduce the 10 to 20%. Generally, when you're switching from BID to QD, you reduce by 20%. That's in my, like, that should be in my cheat sheets here for insulin calculations. Yeah. This one right here, the switching BID to, I guess they didn't switch due to 20%, they only did a 10%, but maybe because their A1C is high, but yeah, that's still the best sounding answer for the exam. Yes, so all the exams, it used to be they didn't, so it was really annoying for the non-pharmacists. But all the last two I've written, they've had both the generic name and the brand name medication on the exam. So I imagine they would keep doing that. That's a good question. Everyone asks that every year. No problem. Okay, yeah. So that's the end of the questions that people email to me. So I just want to open it up, and if you have a question, just unmute yourself, or, oh, here we go. Am I correct that the questions are not numbered on the exam? No, I believe they are. On my exam, I think that it was. So yeah, it should be 1 to 165. Any easy way to recognize the calcium channel blockers? Yes. Oh, I better write these down. I keep forgetting. People can't see the chat, so I need to write these down, or else people, when I record it, people are wondering who am I talking to? So just give me 1 second here. Yes. And then, is there an easy? Yeah, they all end in peen. So nifedipine, amlodipine, yeah, so they all usually end in dipine. So that's a easy way to recognize the calcium channel blockers. Felodipine, stuff like that. I don't think that calcium channel blocker showed up on my exam, so I would probably, and you don't need to know the doses or anything like that, but it is, in real life, it is useful to know that, is this person on an ACE and ARB? That's the important part. Okay. So next question. Do you have to know the eGFRs for medication? That's a good question, Brittany. Whoops. That's a good question, Brittany. I think there was an exam where they asked, like, this person has a GFR of blah, 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 and which medication would be okay for them. I know, I totally understand that everyone hates that picture and that it's hard to memorize. If you don't have room for it, if you don't have room for it in your if you're kind of like filled up, I wouldn't memorize it. At most, you lose 1 question. There's never been more than 1 question. And I know that it's a complicated one to memorize. So yeah, if try to memorize it by class. Like I know that, like it doesn't always work out, but if you kind of have a general idea that, okay, repaglinide I can use to pretty low, metformin's 60 to 45 and 30, those would be the ones I would try to memorize, like the more common ones. But yeah, I know it's a hard one to memorize. Okay. AJ asks, is there a way to tell which questions you have skipped? When I did the practice test, there was no indicator like on my exams that I could see, and I had to scroll through each one to make sure none were missed. Oh, here, let me just, oh, there's lots of people entering. Just give me 1 second here. Best you can, or the more common meds. Okay. I think it should, like, when I wrote it was like in May. So I believe, yeah, don't think you do have a thing on Top Hat that shows you which questions you've done. So I know, and that's one of the disadvantages of doing it online. You can't mark up the exam. Like I know if like there was like 1 or 2 not questions. So usually I circle the not part to make sure that I don't get confused. I think at the end of the exam though, when I hit submit, there was like you have answered all questions or something like I think there was a little bit of a reminder when I hit the submit button that you have answered 165 out of 165 questions. So I assume at that point it would say like if you haven't answered some, it'd be like 164 or something like that.
As I just the practice one. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I was probably going to say the same thing.
Okay, I just did the practice ones on Top Hat, and what I noticed is that there's an index on the left-hand side with all the questions, like a little intro, and then just to the right of it, you can see a little bubble. And if it's clear, you haven't answered it, and if it's black, you've answered it. And then I noticed on the top of the kind of like the toolbar or whatever, it actually had a list of like how many were answered and unanswered as well. Oh, okay. So there's a couple different cues, I think, if it's going to be the same, but I didn't see a number like a 1 through 65. I just saw them all listed individually, but not a number.
Yeah, but I think when I went and actually clicked on that, like where it didn't have the dot, when I clicked on that, I think it went directly to that question.
Yeah, it can. And also I tried it out on the top toolbar as well, where it said you have 1 unanswered and 3 unsaved.
Yes.
And then I was able to click on the 1 unanswered, and it went right to the one that I hadn't answered, to the 3 saves. So there's a little bit of navigation there. So.
Okay, good. That's good to know.
If I may add, I had a pretty long conversation with both Top Hat and CDE CB today because I couldn't access any of the practice exams. So I got that sorted out. Apparently there's like 6 options that are like 3 real ones, and then there's 3 repetitions, right? I don't know what everybody else's screen looks like. It sounds like there are people who want to go through 165, questions that are not related to CD, like the content, but just to practice it, to go through all 165 questions and do it more than once, just to feel comfortable about the platform. I wasn't sure like why I had 6 choices. So anyway, that cleared that up for me, but it is a little finicky, and the whiteboard is not big enough. So if you wanted to kind of like, when you start it and you want to put your cheat sheets from your head into there, is not enough. And I said, why is that? And she said, they're working on it because the platform is designed for university students, not adult learners. So as long as, just put it in their evaluation, I figure more people who comment on that, they'll maybe get on it a little bit faster than not.
Good idea. Yeah. Like, definitely, like, don't get mad in the exam itself. That's really pointless because you're running out of time. The most important thing on exam to like, more important than anything I've taught you guys, is to just keep calm on the exam. If you find that you're getting nervous, take 7 deep breaths, because 7 is the target A1C, and just calm down and slow down. most of my patients, most of my students that have failed was because they kind of got rattled by a question, they couldn't understand it, and then they got nervous and they went back and switched all their questions. Almost always go with your gut, go with your first answer. That's usually your best choice. The students who have not passed have always gone in and changed a whole bunch of answers afterwards. So I would say just, go with your first answer. There is a calculator function and there is a clock function as well. I lost the clock function on my test. I don't know where it went. It just disappeared on me. So try to practice on Top Hat a little bit before the exam. It was really annoying because I wanted to see how much time I had, but I didn't want to look away because then they would accuse me of cheating and stuff like that. But I searched everywhere for this clock function. I had no idea where it was. Okay, next question. It isn't updated for SGLT2s. Oh, you're right. Josie makes a good point. So this statement here, oops, this one here is not updated for, this is the 2018 exam. So there's a new one, the 2020 pharmacotherapy update that shows a new one with altered values for SGLT2s. So you should be memorizing that one, not this one. Okay, I'll just bring it up quickly. It should be, yeah, you'll find it in just the how to study section of chapter study guide down here. And then it has an updated graph that you can take a look at for, oh. Okay, too many people are on my website. It's slowing down. So, but there's a graph there that, here we go. It's right. Okay, where is it? Okay, it should be, there should be an updated graph somewhere. I'm surprised it's not here.
I didn't see it on there, so maybe I missed it. I thought maybe I missed it because you said there is one.
I think it's the flow chart that you're looking at the top of the page there. There isn't an updated graph like you showed, but it's more noted.
Oh yeah, sorry. I meant the flow chart. The flow chart is updated. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, next question. When I check Top Hat for functionality, sorry, when I check Top Hat 2 practice exams, after much tech support, I believe they determined that these were not functioning and have them removed. As long as I can sign in and do the 8 short test quizzes, I assume the entire exam will be available. It should be. Yeah, like I had problems logging in at first as well. Like there's pros and cons to doing at home. Like it's nice and quiet. Like sometimes when you go to a gymnasium full of other nervous people, then you start getting nervous and then that's bad. But there are some technical issues that can happen. I found Top Hat pretty responsive. Like if I messaged them, they would say something right away. So yeah, but you can log into Top Hat, just play around with it, try to be as comfortable with it as much as possible for your exam day. Any tips for writing the exam using Top Hat? Not really. Like once you get into it, it's just like any other exam. Yeah, just as with the regular exam, just watch your time, go with your first answer, and yeah, once you get into it, it's just like any other exam. Lots of different complaints about Top Hat. Can we review learning styles? So are you talking, Brittany, are you talking about that, what's it called? That, I know what you're talking about.
There's 4 different types of learners that they sometimes allude to.
Yeah, so that question showed up on my exam about last time. And I think, do you remember the names of those learning styles, Brittany? I'm just trying to remember them. Like those are like inflective learning style or something like that. I had a question on, I created a question on it, but then it didn't show up on my exam. So I decided to take that question out because it was like so confusing, those 4 learning styles. I could barely wrap my head.
Question about like, it was like one where they wanted to like experiment with different
Yeah.
options. So, but I'm not sure. If it's not that important, then I won't waste time on it.
I wouldn't waste time on it. It might not show up.
Is it
Yeah,
like
I
those
tried to find it in the guidelines, and I wasn't able to find it. I was able to find it online with the explanation, but not within the guidelines. So I found it was a bit frustrating.
Yeah, it's these ones, these converging, assimilating, diverging, accommodating. So I find this whole thing extremely confusing, and I don't think it's worth your time to memorize it, especially because it might not show up on your exam. To be honest, even if I had this, I still might not be able to answer the question. Now, Conrad mentioned that there are ones like a visual learning style or a kinetic learning style. Those are that might show up on the exam. But this thing about, I did create a question on this, but it didn't show up on my exam, so I took it out of my exams. Like, I just don't think it's worth memorizing. Okay. Thank you for noting the amount of time. Yeah, you have about 90 seconds per question. So if you get stuck on a question, it's important not to get stuck on it because it might be one of those pilot questions. So your real exam is 140 questions. There's 25 pilot questions that they put in there where even if you get the question right, you get 0 marks. So if you're stuck on a question and you spend lots of time on it and it's a pilot question, then even if you got it right, it's worth 0. So it's not, if you get stuck, just skip it and go to the next question. It's not worth staying on one question and trying to answer it. They're all worth the same. And yeah, I would suggest just keep on going. Don't get stuck on a question and keep going. Also, like, okay, here. Can you review the correction dose? Guidelines were clear, sliding scale are not recommended. Okay, so the correction, so there's two different things. Like sliding scales are where it's completely reactionary, like their sugar is 20 and then you give them X amount. If their sugar is whatever, then if your sugar is low, then you give them 0. So that's different from basal bolus insulin, because basal bolus insulin, you give a base amount of insulin with every meal, regardless of their sugar. And then you can put a correction factor on top of it to give more if their sugars are high or less if their sugars are low or on target. So that's so you still use correction factors in real life. It's just sliding scales are not recommended because they're completely reactionary. You didn't give any insulin with them regardless of their meals, but with insulin correction factor and insulin carb ratios, you are correcting for that. Basically, you're just kind of like taking over the job of their pancreas. Like your pancreas, assuming that none of you guys have diabetes right now, is very, very active. It's testing your sugar every second. If it notices things are a little bit high, it squirts out some insulin. Insulin that goes into your bloodstream acts in a couple minutes and gets out in a couple minutes. That's why we don't get highs and lows, because our pancreas is always on this. But the way we treat patients mostly, it's actually kind of unnatural. Like my pancreas doesn't wake up, roll out of bed, squirt out 100 units of Levemir, and then go back to sleep. That's not how a pancreas works. It's always testing the sugar, making minor adjustments, and so that's why we get a lot more lows in patients taking insulin, and that's why insulin pumps work better as well. They mimic normal insulin secretion a lot better. Insulin pumps a little bit of insulin at a time, and when it's high, you do a bolus and you can adjust, various times per day. That's why you reduce it by 25%, because insulin's being used a lot more efficiently. It's much more like physiological insulin secretion. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
There was one question that came up about using syringes for insulin pump users. And when I read through, because I don't know too much about, I haven't got much experience of the insulin pumps, but some of the manufacturers, if something goes wrong with it, you change the set, but they're still recommending using the syringe to give an insulin dose rather than going through the pump. So what's the reason for that?
Sure. So insulin pumps work with, like, the basic reason is that if the insulin pump is really not working. Okay, so a couple things. For people with type 1 diabetes, they have no insulin secretion. And so they are more at risk of going into diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, insulin pumps only use rapid acting insulin. So if, let's say, a gear breaks down somewhere in the insulin pump and it stops pumping insulin or is unable to pump insulin, then they will go into DKA, maybe in 5 hours or something like that. So that timeline is really, really tight because there's only rapid acting insulin on board. So yeah, sometimes, a lot of the times when an insulin pump is failing to pump insulin, it's usually an infusion set problem. Like there's a kink in the infusion set, and that's why it's not working. I do have a bunch of insulin pump videos actually, where I show you the infusion set and stuff like that. Oopsies. Anyway, it's just in my video portion. So here we go. Yeah, it's just in my video section. So so usually changing the set will solve the problem, but let's say it is a gear problem, some sort of internal problem. And so even if you change the infusion set, the pump is not pumping insulin. And so we've got this big danger of the person going into DKA. So that's why they always want you to have like a backup plan of the syringe, just in case it's a mechanical problem and it's not the infusion set.
Right. But if you change the infusion set, do you still give the insulin, the first dose by syringe, or if you know that it's working because you've just changed it, do you not just go ahead with the insulin pump?
Yeah, like if you do have, like, let's say your sugars are, let's say your sugars are high, you're on an insulin pump, your sugar's like 15. It's like, oh, that's weird. My insulin pump should have been pumping insulin. So you change the infusion set, and yeah, you give yourself a bolus with your infusion set. But in, like an hour or so, if your sugars are still going up, I would assume that there's something a mechanical problem with the insulin pump, and at that point you would switch to syringes.
Right. Okay. Because a couple of questions that I came across, I don't know where they were now, but they kind of implied that you have to give the dose, the correction dose, with the syringe, even by after changing. Now maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because you want to be sure, you don't want to, you want to make sure that first dose is being administered, and you don't want to take any chances, just in case, like you say, if you wait an hour and just check the blood sugars after that, you've wasted an hour really, haven't you? So is that maybe the reason?
Yeah, like if my sugars were like 30, then I'd be like, no, I need insulin now, regardless. Yeah. Like I would give myself the syringe now. Like if your sugar is like 15, it's okay, maybe I'll try changing the infusion set out. But if my sugars were 30 plus, I'd be like, okay, nope, I absolutely 100% need this now. Let's just use a syringe.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, perfect. Okay. I'm not doing a good job of writing these questions down, but people can listen. I think there was a question in the chat. Okay. Yeah, let me write. I need to really copy and paste these out of the chat so that people listening on the YouTube are wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Okay, can you explain why you usually adjust insulin with regards to exercise? Would you only consider increasing insulin when exercise is intensive and more than 1 hour? So basically, you would adjust insulin because you want to avoid hypoglycemia. When you exercise, you're using up more sugar, your insulin resistance comes down. And so, you want to make sure that the patient doesn't have a low when they're doing physical activity. And so generally, depending on how physically active they are, you would reduce the insulin by a certain amount. Would you only consider increasing insulin when exercise is intensive and, well, I wouldn't increase insulin, I'd be decreasing insulin when exercise is intensive and more than 1 hour? It depends how low they are. If I know my patient's going for a long walk and their sugar's at 4, then yeah, I would be reducing their insulin. If their sugars were if I had a type 2 and their sugars were like 20 and they're going for exercise, I might not reduce it at all, especially if they're really obese and I know they're really insulin resistant. So it would definitely depend on the situation. Yeah, does that answer your question? Okay. All right. Any other questions? We've still got 15 minutes. Yeah, I'm just wondering because exercise can sometimes cause hyperglycemia. Yeah, so just like kind of what Dr. Ross explained, it'd be reactive. Yes. So yeah, so like if you're doing intense exercise, since yeah, sometimes you're, like I explained, when you're going through intense exercise, it's kind of like a fight or flight response. Your adrenaline is surging, and your adrenaline cancels out. It's a counter-regulatory hormone, so it cancels out insulin and causes your sugars to be high. Also, if you've got a lot of adrenaline running through your body is breaking down all of its energy stores, like its glycogen stores and stuff like that, to get it to your muscle so that you can either fight your opponent or flee from the brown bear that's chasing you. But I wouldn't, that would be kind of dangerous it'd be difficult to time with like, okay, you're going for a boxing match, but I'm going to give you 10 units before to make sure that you don't go high. But what happens if you go low and then the guy turns you into a bloody punching bag? Like that'd be really difficult to time. And yeah, so usually you wouldn't dose it for that kind of intense exercise. And yeah, generally with that, you would just treat it afterwards because it would be too hard to time beforehand. Does that answer your question, PM? Okay. Sorry, someone, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, it's me. One of your questions I was doing today on the exam, it just kind of reminded me, relates to this because it was talking about somebody who was doing an intense interval and their blood sugar went up. Mm-hmm. And the two of the options which were close was, do you give a correction dose, or do you just let it come down on its own? And after Dr. Ross's session, he implied that there were some people that it would just correct itself. Mm-hmm. You remember? So if we have that question in the exam, do we go with the fact that we do give a correction dose, or do we just let it come down on its own?
That's a good question. If I encountered that question on an exam, I would try to read into the situation. Like, is he having a meal afterwards? If he is having a meal, maybe it's a little bit safer to give a correction dose. If he's, yeah, that one's hard. That would be hard to decide on exam. I don't think he'll get into that much details, but yeah, that would be a difficult one to answer an exam. I try to look into the patient history and kind of see what he did in the past. In real life, that's what I would do, to see what he did in the past, and then kind of go from there.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't. It's that one really depends on the situation.
it was just that it was in your question, and the answer was for your question was that you give you give the correction dose.
Yeah, generally you would, but now that Dr. Ross mentioned it, maybe, oh, there's like some blinking lights outside. Yeah, that one's a hard one. I would in most circumstances, but yeah, it kind of depend on the patient situation, but I would in most cases if it were me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a question about COVID. Do they ask any COVID related questions? I didn't see the webinar on COVID on your website. That's why I worried. I don't think there was any questions on COVID on my exam, so I wouldn't worry about it. COVID is still a big thing, so maybe afterwards watch the COVID video, but there wasn't any questions on COVID or COVID vaccines or anything like that on my exam. Okay. Karen has a great question. In practice, I'm curious how much vitamin C would it take to falsely lower A1C? That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's quite a high dose. What vitamin C does is that it alters the glycosylation of hemoglobin. And so that falsely lowers the A1C. In practice, I have tons of patients taking vitamin C, and I assume that their A1C is accurate. Like I haven't seen anyone where their A1C was like way off and they're on vitamin C. So I would imagine that you would have to take a lot of vitamin C to falsely lower it by a significant amount, enough to like alter treatment. I can.
Esmond, it's Carlene here.
Oh, hi, Carlene.
We've actually seen patients with alterations in the 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day.
Oh, wow.
So 500, taking 500, no big deal, or whatever's in your multivitamin. But if it's in that 1 to 2,000, which people will take, there has been some changes. I don't know that that's like an evidence-based statement, but I've seen it in practice.
Okay, that is good to know.
We've just been kind of saying don't take more than 500 vitamin C as a single supplement, just as a rough guideline, just because we just know we're not sure if it's 1,000 or 2,000 or even higher. But
okay,
and then just also the concerns about the vitamin C with causing any problem with kidney stones potentially too, with the 2,000 and higher. So that's kind of what the endos in Edmonton were just saying. So we kind of took consensus agreement on that.
Okay, good. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carlene. Yeah, usually I tell people just eat more fruit. So I don't think a lot of my patients are using like really high doses, but yeah, if you've seen alterations at 1,000, maybe that's something I'll start asking. Thanks for sharing that, Carlene. Okay. Does anyone have trouble logging onto Top Hat? Do we have to scan our ID each time? So yes. So if for some reason you get locked out of you get booted out of your system, or your computer shuts off, you have to do the whole thing all over again. You have to do the whole scan thing and whole ID thing. And so yeah, that can be frustrating, but try to keep calm. That's important.
Thank you, Esmond.
No problem.
Yes.
Okay, from communications questions, would you say it's most important to address the psychosocial issues first? Oh, actually, let me copy and paste this. So AJ asks, would it be most address the psychosocial issues first and then medication insulin adjustments, even in the presence of hypoglycemia? Just wondering how much it's worth focusing on the model of change in counseling. So I don't think there'll be a question that will pit hypoglycemia versus psychosocial questions. But, in those questions, I don't think there'll be a question that will pit one against the other. But just like in real life, if, Jardiance is the best medication for this elderly gentleman, but he's homeless or has no money to pay for it, then that recommendation is worthless in practical terms. So yeah, so I don't think it'll pit one against the other, but in those questions, it is important to look at the psychosocial issues. If like, trying to get in real life, trying to get a depressed person to exercise is really, really hard. So just having to answer, oh, do 150 minutes of exercise when they're suicidal or something like that, it doesn't make sense in real life either. So yeah, it'll probably just be a psychosocial question or a hypoglycemia question. It won't be both kind of like battling for priority. Or at least I've never seen that before. How many diabetes study specific questions can we expect? Probably not a lot. I think there was maybe one question on a UK PDS or DCCT on my exam. I think there's usually one on those, but they didn't ask things like on like advanced or anything like that. Everyone asks like, do I need to memorize MPREG or Canvas or things like that? And the answer is no. You just need to know the results of kind of like the conglomerate results. Like if you look at all the DPP-4 studies, Timmer, Saver, all that stuff, there's lots of them, but the only thing you need to know is that none of them showed CV benefit. Like you take all of those studies and the only thing you need to memorize is no CV, did not show CV benefit. Same thing with all the SGLT2 studies. You can say that, to summarize all of them, MPREG and Invokana showed secondary benefit, Forxiga did not. All of them showed improvements in renal benefit. No need to memorize all of them, that's all you need to know. Same thing with the GLP-1s. Ozempic and semaglutide, Trulicity and liraglutide showed CV benefit. The rest of them did not. You could. It's probably a good thing to know. Good to know what the UK PDS and DCCT is, but I don't think you need to go around memorizing every study. Does that answer your question, Elsie? Okay, I'm going to say, oh yes, thanks. Okay, perfect. Metis is thanks. Okay. So 726. Let me give you kind of like a breakdown of just some tips. One is that stay calm and watch your time. Now, I've also had some, sometimes there's some questions where you might have some specialty on. Like I had a question on, I think it was pregnancy or something like that. And then I have a friend who works at the diabetes and pregnancy clinic. And then she was outraged at this question because in her opinion, all the questions were wrong. And she spent like 10 minutes she wrote on this was back in the paper exam. She wrote on the paper exam for like, I don't know, like 10 minutes saying that all the questions were wrong, explaining why, and she felt vindicated. But in my head, it's like, that's a humongous waste of time. Like that might have been a pilot question and you just spent 10 minutes telling off the CDE writers that, all their questions are wrong. Like, it's just not worth it. Like if you have a question and you don't just skip it. It's probably a pilot question and don't spend too much time on it. Also, just as I mentioned before, go with your first answer. That's usually right. I've also had some students lately that kind of like look into questions a lot. Like they'll see a patient and it's like, oh, it's type 1. That means they have to be young. That means they have to be thin. That means that, they're probably usually type 1s affect more Caucasians. That means they must be Caucasian. Well, if they're white and thin and Caucasian, they must live in Toronto. And if they live in Toronto, well, Ontario covers these medications. And I'm like, how are you getting this? Like, don't read into the question too much. If it says the person has type 1 diabetes, that's all you're going for. Like don't include all these labels from your own mind onto it. If it says type 1, then it's just type 1. Also, you're looking for the best answer. And So there could be multiple answers which are kind of right, kind of like Conrad's question. Some of those questions are kind of right, but you have to look for the most right question. But it doesn't mean that you also have to find a question that's 100% right. So what I mean by that is that, I had a student, and like, she'll look at the answer and she gets the right answer, but then she can think of, like, out of 100 scenarios, 99 times out of 100, that question works. But then she thinks of the one corner, rare, super rare, ultra corner case where that question is wrong. And then she changes her answer when she did have the right answer. So just remember, these question makers are just people like you and me. Like, I'll be honest, if I'm making diclofenac gel 200 grams and I make like 199 or 201, I don't care. I'm going home. Like, same thing with the question makers. If they make a question 99 times out of 100, it's right, and that one corner case, it doesn't work, trust me, they don't care. They've gone home, and you're sitting there peeing your pants because you're worrying about that one corner case. Like, these questions are just made by humans. Like, if you have a question, you have an answer that's 99% right, that's probably the right one. Try not to overthink it, and think of the one corner case where it doesn't work, and then change your answer. So those are my humble suggestions for you. I hope all of you have the best of luck on the exam. Remember to keep calm. That's the most important lesson I can teach you. And yeah, I'll be online. I have tomorrow off, so I'll be active on the exam forums. If you're writing tomorrow, I'll probably be still looking at the exam forums tonight to help you out. But yeah, best of luck, everybody. And yeah, we'll see what happens. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, just keep calm. It's almost over. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, best of luck, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. See y'all.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll see you later.
Yeah, see you later. Okay. Oops, why didn't it end? Why isn't this working?